Hi, this is Professor Kim Nelson with the Jewelry Design Department of the Fashion Institute of Technology, continuing our series of tutorials for basic Rhino modeling, JD138. This tutorial is going to be on rendering. So I'll open me a model that I can render. Rendering is really a couple of components. You have a materials editor, and then you have a renderer. The materials editor allows you to assign materials to any object in your scene. Okay? And that's what we refer to files as. Once you start rendering, we call it a scene. So any of the objects in your scene can have a material assigned to them. And as the name implies, the materials editor allows you to edit those materials, to alter them or create your own for that matter. The renderer is the virtual camera, if you'd like to think of it that way, although it's a misnomer because in Rhino the virtual camera is what we're looking through right now. But it's basically what allows an image to be made so you can see it. So Rhino's has both of these things as part of the software. It has the materials editor, and it has camera, which for rendering, a rendering camera, which is uses what we call ray tracing technology. Ray tracing means that a ray of light is charted, bounces off a surface, comes back to the camera, and Rhino determines what you're going to see. Okay. Both of those aspects of Rhino are fairly weak. They're found here on the render tools. You also have lights. You can set up lights and lighting to look at your object, light it differently, more dramatically. So it has the features, but the features are not terribly robust. If you want really robust rendering, you need to purchase a third-party plugin or software. But Rhino can do a fair job with it, especially if you download the free plugin that they've made available. Okay, right here. See, it says Ray Traced with Neon. Neon is a free download. You can get it from Rhino's website. Just go to rhino3d.com, type in Neon. You can download it for free. It will install automatically. With Neon, that improves the quality of the rendering camera substantially. Rhino's native rendering camera, for example, has a real difficult time with transparent materials. It does a nice job with reflective materials, but it is really poor when it comes to anything with translucence or transparency. Neon will do a much better job, so I highly recommend that you download it. All the lab computers, or at least the ones in our classroom, 516, should all have Neon already on them. I specified that as part of the lab setup. So if you're doing this at school, you should be able to use Neon right off the menu, like I have here. Okay, first thing we have to do is assign materials and stage our scene. Right now, this has got the ground, as it were, passing right through the middle of it. Okay, so we have two choices: either move the whole model up or establish a ground plane down below. Either is fine. I'll establish the ground plane down below. Easiest way to do that is a cutting plane. I'll move that down in the front view. I want it to come as close as I can to touching this. You don't have to go crazy about it, but there you go. I'm going to set a C-plane to that. How many of you were surprised to hear that? And I'll actually save that C-plane. want your ground plane to be big enough that it fills the whole scene. Since I have a seaplane set to it, I can do the origin point just at 0. And then I'm going to drag this out large, so that when I'm zoomed in on my ring, see, even as big as that is, if I pick an angle like this, it's not going to be big enough. So, to counter that, if that's a concern for you, then another option that you have is to rebuild this. 7733 should be fine. And roll this up. Go to a vertical seaplane. Move it. Now, problem is, I can't move this one because it will actually cause an issue. So I'm going to actually rebuild it with more points. I need it to stay flat under my ring. So let's give it 11, 11. Here we go. That way this can stay flat. I'm just going to use, control point editing to... Now, you don't have to make this really pretty. It doesn't matter. What you're just trying to do is to create a back wall. Okay? So that when you zoom in, you have more freedom. Okay? You do want to know which side you're going to photograph from. I'll be photographing from this side, so I will also come in here and bring these up as well. And actually the easiest way to do this, is to do them together. By the way, when you put a big image like this or a big part like this into your file, your performance can slow down, especially if you're running recording software in the background. So, don't panic. It's just you're asking the computer to do some intensive math. Even though the object is fairly simple, it's just a flat surface. And you'll see I keep the same L shape of points or pattern selected. And as I move up, I remove a row. Each time. Okay, and that will give me a basin, basically, that my ring can sit in. Now, if for any reason when I zoom in to photograph my ring, I shouldn't run into, if I go that way I will, but if I go this way, I should be covered all the way around. Now you have to be aware that depending on what texture you put on this, how because you're going to assign a texture to your seaplane, to your ground plane. Any texture you apply is going to bend, and it might look funny. So you might want to use a flat ground plane and adjust your camera angle so that you don't see anything you don't want to see. Okay, so we have our ground plane. The next thing, geometry-wise, we want to put in is we want to put in a couple of cameras. I mean, a couple of lights. Okay. Sorry, I took a minute to take care of something. Back to our lights. We want to set up our lights. So we're going to go to our render tools. We're going to create a rectangular light. There are several varieties: spotlight, point light, directional light, rectangular light. I do not have time to go through all the ways you can light a model in Rhino. We're going to make rectangular lights. I'm going to make one right in front, and it's just like making a surface. I'm going to put on my grid snap. I'm going to make one that's 4 blocks wide, 2 blocks deep. That'll work. Okay. See a little arrow? It tells you the direction the light's pointing. That's not going to do. So I'll go to my right C-plane so I can get a steering wheel going this way to rotate. And use my grid snap. And I'll just rotate it 90 degrees. Shift up, shift over for starters. Now, if I say render and tell Rhino to render this scene, you will see that we have a bold light source pointing at the front of the object. Okay? You can also do it live action here by just going rendered there. Okay? And you can see that the light is smacking into the front of our object. Okay? If I take this and I move it up, it will change. Yeah, we are lit more from above. Now you'll notice it's not lit evenly. That's because Rhino has its own light source. So there are actually 2 lights going on. Rhino's, which is the default, like we use in painting and jewelry, from the left coming down. But there is a second light, and that is the light we're working with now. Alright, I want to rotate this so it points right at my piece, but not just yet. First I want to position it. Excuse me. So I'm going to move it away from my object. That's about right. There's no hard written rule. And I'm going to move it over a little bit to the side. And I'm going to record history and I'm going to mirror it. Okay. Now I'm going to rotate this camera. First I'm going to rotate it to face into the center. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any geometry assigned to it, so there's nothing to snap to. Alright, so we're going to do it by eye. Once again, we don't have to be... Wow, that right view was trippy. Hang on a minute, that's not a right view. Don't know what happened there. That'll drive me crazy. That's a right view. Thank you, Rhino. Okay. So I'll just click in the middle of it. And rotate it. Actually, what I can do to get more control is rotate it, shift, pull straight out, and the second one I'll point to 0. That's not going to work either. Fine. red snap and it's not going to work. Fine. I'll just do that. Now, the annoying thing is that I had history assigned with a mirror, so anything I did to this one should have happened to that one. I'm going to rotate again now. This time from the center. It's really unusual. I don't know why my history is not updating with this. Lights are subject to history. I've done it a million times, so I don't know why, unless I moved the child. No, I did not. Okay, maybe something has changed since the last time I used Rhino. Let's find out. Yeah, apparently record history is not going to work with the light. Okay. I don't even want to try and explain why that might be. Okay, fine. Doesn't make a huge amount of difference. I basically want a light to the left and I want a light to the right. Okay. And I would like a light in back at the same distance. Copy equals yes. Okay. So now I have 3 lights. And if I zoom in and I do my rendered, you can see their impact. We will play with those lights more a little later. For now, it's just important to know that we have them in place. We have our lights. We have our ground plane. This is the easy part. We've set up our physical scene. Notice what happens when I turn those off. Okay, and Rhino's native lighting takes over. Okay. Back to shaded. So now we're going to assign some materials. I'm going to assign the material. Okay. Render tools. Little tube of paint is your materials panel. This is your materials editor. You'll see basic material, basic material, basic material. Everything in here is a basic material, which is Rhino stuff. We want to assign a regular material to this. Going to hit the plus sign. Okay, and it'll take you to render content. Click on metal. For interest, I'm going to go gold. Okay. I need to click a different material just so it's not trying to change the name of gold. Then I'll come back to gold. Right click, I'm going to select what I want gold. Right click on this and just say assign to selection. Okay. That's it. That's now gold. So if we hit rendered, we should see gold. But the only thing that's gold here is the color. Okay? That's because reflective materials and transparent materials have to have an environment they're sitting in digitally in order to reflect. And this has no environment. It's kind of complicated, but that environment is usually either a cube or a sphere. And it all takes place without your seeing it. I believe that Rhino prefers the spherical method, and you can use cubical as an option. But that's all going to be a lot deeper than you want to need to go. So we need to put an environment. Environment panels. Right now, our background is a solid color. Okay, and it's gray. If I click environment, it opens up a new dialog. Basic environment. Basic environment is no environment. They just should call that no environment. We're going to add an environment. Click on the environments folder. We have 3 to choose from. Now that may seem kind of crazy, but you actually can manipulate these environments. So we'll start with Rhino Interior. Okay. And we're done. We now have an environment in place. Okay, so if we go rendered, wait a minute, it's the same. That's because Rhino doesn't know to look for it. Now see, if you were doing this at home on your own, you would go crazy going, I've given it an environment, I've given it a material, nothing is happening. You're going to go to your Tools, Options, and you're going to pick, not rendering, Rhino Render. You pick Rhino Render. Under Environment, you're going to come down and click Rhino Interior. So now it knows to look for it. And we'll hit OK. Now if we go to our method here and hit Rendered, as you rotate, you can actually see the environment in the background. Okay? Sometimes that's exactly what you want. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes what you would like to have is you would like to have the background that you're looking at either be just a simple background or something other than what's reflecting into this gold. In that case, go back to your Environments panel, and where it sees Rhino Interior, we had to bring that in so we could use it. And now that it's in, we don't have to actually utilize it for the background. We can change the background back to solid, for example. And now we have a reflective material and our plain background. So we've assigned materials to the metal. How about the stones? Well, actually, how about the yeah, let's do stones. I want to do a color stone here. So we don't have a material for colored stones, so I'll pick one. It's going to be under transparent. You have ruby, sapphire, and emerald. Okay, those are your choices. I'm going to call that ruby. Click another material so it's not trying to change the name. Go back. Right click, assign to selection, and now that's a ruby. This gives you some idea how effectively Rhino handles transparent materials without using a ray tracer. I mean, without using an external ray tracer. If I go ray traced with neon, okay, I'm going to get a different effect considerably. Now you will notice that our reflective gold is not quite as nice. Okay, that is true. It's a different kind of feeling, and we can work with settings to modify that. Okay, so for solid reflective materials, Rhino's native shader, native renderer, is really nice. By the way, you'll recognize that this is how things look when we emap them. This is when we emap. All Rhino's doing is doing what we just did on its own. So if we want this to look more like a gem, period, we want to come in and play with the properties of that ruby. basic settings. Okay, look at the transparency here. Okay, the transparency is set to 100%. Rubies are not 100% transparent. I will take that down to closer to 50%. Okay, that helps. Now you have colors assigned. The only thing that's been assigned to color is the transparency. These are the three components, actually four components of the color. Alright, the transparency color is set to this red, which is now pink. The color itself is set to nothing. By setting that to a color, that changes things quite a bit. And we will evaluate with our ray trace renderer. Okay. So you can see it doesn't look real Ruby-esque, all right, but it's got body color, which it didn't have before. And this looks flashy and nice, but it's really not looking like a Ruby either. And this is the game we're going to play. We're going to go back and forth and try and find a way to get a setting that we like. Now that I have, reflectivity is set to 10%. I'm going to bounce that up a little bit. I'll take the transparency up a little higher now that we have a body color. Your IRQ is a reflective index, okay? Rhino actually tries to duplicate the reflective indexes of materials. We don't happen to know what those are, but if you change this number, it will affect how this looks, particularly when you use a ray tracer, a sophisticated ray tracer like Neon. It will give you a different result, okay? Now, by the way, one of the reasons Neon looks dead is that Neon depends very heavily on external lights. So by bringing our lights back on and a ground plane, Neon doesn't look quite so bad. Speaking of that ground plane, we might do well to assign something to it. Okay? We don't want it to be a gold or ruby. Oops, sorry. There's stone. Okay. These are all going to tile in that they're going to all have a very recognizable texture that you can work with. You have plastics you can use. Different screen materials you can lay down. Special materials. Checkerboard. Herringbone. Grass. Okay? You can play with these to get what you want in the background. There's wood. Okay? I'm going to go with cork. Okay? And that gives me a background image. This is this is also really important because the ray tracer depends on these reflections from the ground to fill this in. All right. So now we're getting something that's a little more sophisticated. I don't love how our ruby is looking, so I'm going to work with that some more. I usually work in the rendered view because the resources to do the ray tracing take a lot. I have one of the most powerful laptops known to man, and it has a very hard time. You'll also notice that I lose my shadows in the ray traced from the from the light. That's a fluke in my copy of Rhino. If you go into Rhino's news group, they'll say, "Oh, well, you should be getting shadows. Try this, try that. It's a video card setting. It's a this, that, the other." It's Rhino's fault, basically. If you want cast shadows, or if I at least want them, I need to use the ray tracer, the neon. Okay, so back to my materials editor, back to my Ruby. Okay, I can assign textures to color, transparency, bump, or environment. Okay. This gives me environment maps. Don't think I want to use an environment map. If I come to transparency, it's still going to take me to the environment maps. I don't want an environment map. I want a texture map. So I'm going to, I need to find out where those are held on Rhino's memory. That's my problem. And that might take me a second. So bear with me. Environment maps. I do not want an environment map. Rendering content. So I went up one folder, render content, here we go. Alright. Textures has a whole bunch of things in it we can use. The one I like to play with is the Rhino emblem. Okay. So I've just put the Rhino emblem into my stone, and you can actually see it reflecting. Alright. By lowering this number, I determine how much influence it's going to have. Okay? But it does start to add an interest to the stone. Okay? If I click that itself, it accesses more options. I don't want either one of those. Okay, one of the maddening things to me with this setup is that in order to get back to the original thing, I have to go back to color, change materials and come back. And that gets me back to my basic settings. Okay, so I have Rhino in here. There is a place I just can't find it right now. Okay, actually I think the problem is that I've assigned it in the environment and I want to assign it in the color. So yes, because what this in the color slot, color channel, they call it a channel, I am able to adjust the mapping of the texture, which is right here. Yes, okay. If I lock these, now I can change either the rotation or how many repeats there are. If I make 6 repeats, okay, you can see that it repeats the thing 6 times inside. If I make 50 repeats, see how much fun that is? Usually what's actually more effective is a portion. 0.6. Makes it much harder to tell what that thing in the background is. Okay? 0.8. Okay? I have the color set, I have the impact set at 100%. So that I can, by playing with this, I can choose how that ends up looking. And at 100% opacity on the color, basically, I can decide if I like what I have. I can also rotate it. So I can play with it. All I'm trying to do by doing all this nonsense is I'm trying to impose complexity onto my stone, because that's what it needs. Okay. Now I don't want it to have 100% control over the color. Something like that is more reasonable. Let's see how we're going with our ray trace. Okay, this is starting to look more sophisticated, more complicated, more like an actual gem. Okay? And that's what we want. We want it to feel more like a gem material. Play with it a little more. Reflectivity right now is at 26%. The gloss finish is really high. I'm going to drop that a little bit. Can increase my transparency a bit. Set IRQ to 1. That basically, if you see what that did, it basically means that the material is completely transparent. It has no parallax. We want parallax. Okay. It doesn't show well in Rhino's renderer, but it will show more in the ray traced. The overall effect is still a very dark and heavy stone. So we will go back in here and take the transparency higher. That helps. And I'm going to take the color. Lighter. And this is the time pose that's required, is coming up with colors. Oh, reflectivity, I still want to keep it white, maybe barely pink. It's transparency color. Let's increase our reflectivity. See how that affects the ray tracer. It didn't really do much. Okay? So, I'm going to assume that a lot of that darkness I'm picking up is coming from my Rhino bitmap in color. Drop to 25%. Didn't make a tremendous difference, okay? And so that tells me that that wasn't my issue. By the way, a fast way to have done that would have been to simply uncheck the box. By unchecking the box, even though it has a bitmap in place, it won't look for it, it won't see it. And if I did the ray trace with neon, I still have a rather dark stone. It just doesn't have the complexity that it did before. So, I'm going to keep the Rhino out for a minute while I decide where it is that I am going to change the diffuse lighting, see if that makes any difference. Not a lot, no. Okay, it may be something as simple as the lighting. I'm going to turn on a skylight. We were going to do this at the end to to give some overhead light, and then we would change some of the intensity of that light. Let's see what that does for our wireframe. I mean our ray trace stone. Now it still has that real dense feeling, even with the skylight on. Okay, I'm going to go at it one more time. So it's not there. It's got to be here. Ironically, let's see what happens if I lower the reflectivity. Nope. What if I higher it? Once again, it's not doing a lot. And if I just make it transparent, it's not going to help either. Okay, so emission color is actually turns the stone into a light. Okay, so I've just turned my ruby into a tail light on a Pontiac. Okay? I can only keep that if there's a way for me to adjust it, and in most rendering software, there's a luminosity setting, which you can set to 0 or 100, turning it into a beacon if you want. It made no real difference. And unfortunately, Rhino doesn't give us a choice of how to utilize that. So by taking it closer to black, I'm lowering the luminosity. And that's actually pretty nice. So even though that's cheating, it's making it a little bit luminous. It's giving me an effect that I like. And there are no rules here. You do whatever it takes to make a stone that you like. Okay? Oh, sorry. Wrong place. Now, your computers at home, you may have to do this by going into rendering and back and forth. I have enough processing power that I can come at it fairly directly. By the way, when you increase the gloss, you give harder highlights but smaller highlights. I actually like what happens when I increase the gloss. I'm going to bring my Rhino map back in. I'm going to take this transparency color a little more towards violet. And a little bit darker. And a little bit more intense. Okay, I think I've played with the ruby stone enough. It's a believable ruby stone. And there's a limit to how good we're going to get with Rhino's settings. Like I said, you really want fine rendering. You need to look for an expensive, more expensive plugin, or a. Now you notice the longer this sits, the better it gets. It's going to keep processing. You'll see it down here, neon rendering with a timer. And after about 3 minutes, it'll have reached its finest level of rendering on my computer. Yours, it might take longer. So what you see when you first rotate it is not going to be what you see when you're done. It's going to put more detail in. Okay? Alright, I'm going to let that stand. I would like to take the reflectivity back to white, or very nearly white. Yeah, gonna call that good for now. Alright, diamonds. Transparent, diamond. I'm going to select all of my stones, which I can do by just right-clicking on this, select all. Oh, wrong one. My bad. Okay, that happens to me a lot. It's not select all, it's select objects. Okay. As you might expect, all those little faceted gems are going to create a bit of havoc for the processing time. And you can see Rhino's renderer really doesn't know what to do with them at all. Oh, by the way, I didn't know that I had points and curves in there. I don't want those. Select objects, ungroup. Okay. Select curve points, select curves, delete. Okay, because they will show up in my rendering in not a nice way. See, yeah, those are your diamonds. You can't even see them. Okay, you can see them a little better in the ray traced neon. But they still are not great. Okay? They're muddy little things. They really aren't very nice. Okay? In a pinch, will they do? Can you call it a diamond? Yeah, you can. But I don't love them. this is particularly where the Rhino image helps to liven those up a little bit. So, render tools. Diamond. Going to take a look at what they've done here. They've made the diamonds 100% transparent, which makes no sense at all. Reflectivity, they've made them 10% reflective, which makes no sense. It makes very little sense. The white color makes sense. I'm going to click to assign a color. Okay. I'm going to drop that down to below 50%. Okay. And now I will look at it with the ray tracer again. Okay, my diamonds look like little lumps of coal, which is not what I was after. Although it's interesting that in the rendered it actually makes them more believable. Okay, on the diamonds, I may not care for it in the color slot. If I remove it, they look like little pieces of glossy chalk. There we go. That was my confusion. In the diamonds I want it in the environment slot, in color I want it in the color slot. There, did you see the difference that made? Those look like diamonds. Unfortunately, in this situation, I don't get a chance to play with the mapping. The only place you can play with the mapping is in the color box. Here, it gives me, very little that I can do with it. I can click on transparent color, and I can assign it a color if I want to. If I wanted to have a particularly kind of cold, icy feeling to those stones. But yeah, I don't care for it. No. 10% even. I'm not going to care for it. Maybe. It doesn't make much of an effect. But really, I mean, we can reduce how much the environment impacts it. Take it down to 70%. It's going to give you a softer effect. As would changing the reflectivity. And the transparency. Okay, so by playing with these sliders back and forth, you can get a believable gem material out of it. Alright, so I'm done with the materials editor. Back just a little bit more. That's nice. Okay. Now I'm going to address my lighting. And I'm going to address my background bitmap a little bit. Now, of course, how big this cork texture ends up being, I'll go back to rendered just to save my computer the energy. This texture, it might be okay for this size for this piece. If I want to change that, though, I would come to the bitmap texture here, and I can increase the repeat, and the more repeats I make it, the smaller the cork becomes. Okay, to where it can become almost like sand. Okay, so you're the one who's going to determine what effect you want that cork to have. Okay, there it almost looks like a marbly thing. All right. I believe that it only applies it to color. Okay. If we want to assign it to the bump texture, that means that light actually hits it. We can do that too. Okay, so we need to go to Advanced Textures. Okay. We have to make this match. Okay. So that the two are the same. And then on that bitmap, that bump texture, we can diminish it to where it adds as much of an effect as we want. Okay? If we turn it off, it looks like this. If we turn it back on, it looks like that. So, it's another thing you can add or take away, depending. But usually we'll add, you'll see it's adding a little bit more depth to that surface. Okay. By the way, if blue isn't your, if sorry, beige isn't your thing, you can play with that as well. The more this bitmap takes control, the more of the original cork color you're going to have. But so you can flavor these colors by a combination of background color and itself. Okay? So you don't just have to go with the color of the image itself. Alright? So, let's go to our lights. Under properties, okay, we have cameras, wallpaper, if we select those, you get the name of the lights, the nature of the lights, okay? Okay. And there are all kinds of settings that you can apply to it. So we're going to zoom out. We're going to go back to our regular Rhino mode. Isn't that strange? I'm going to pick this light. I'm going to set its intensity down to 80. I'm going to set its shadow intensity down to 60. More or less. I'm going to set this one down to 60. Shadow intensity also at about, now let's make it a little lower, about 40. This one we're going to set all the way down to 40. Now we're going to set its shadows down to about 25 or so. Okay? And take a look at the effect. Okay, you'll see that the strongest shadows are the ones being cast back from here. We have almost no shadow coming forward anymore. You can see how the light's hitting stronger back here than it is in front. Pick up this intensity of shadow and a little bit of intensity on the light. Gives me a little bit more of a shadow. Okay, back to shaded. I'm going to bring up the back shadow. Sorry, rendered won't show it. You can see this bit of shadow coming forward. Okay? So you play with that until you get something that you like. Okay? Okay, the last thing we want to consider here is, this is the last thing we usually do is we're going to apply a skylight or a sun. It's an overall ambient light. So far we're working strictly with our spotlights. We can add to that a skylight or a sun. Usually I prefer skylights. So turn on our skylight. It's going to make a considerable difference to the lighting. Okay? It's like we've kind of moved into a large room, that there's an overall light on top of. our spotlights. I'm going to set this up now. Kind of starting to start thinking about my final view. Okay. Now that's really kind of an intense effect. There is a way to modulate this, to soften it. It's a little bit hidden. So you'll have to find this on this tutorial many times in the future when you're rendering, because it does give you this very, very bright effect, which has a certain amount of charm to it, but it's not what we want. The way you access it is you go into your environments panel. We have this set to a solid color. I'm going to go back to environment. What this will do is give me access to this bitmap. It shouldn't change things much in the image. It'll jerk here in a minute, but the overall effect is going to be about the same. See, there it goes. Because all we did was change whether you could see a background, which we can't see anyway because we have a ground plane in the way. I'm going to go past all of this information. What we're looking for is HDR multiplier. This tells it how strong to make this in the environment. Right now it's set at 1. If we set that down to 0.8, we'll get a much softer effect from the skylight. It'll kick in just a minute. You can see that it took the edge off of it, made it more soft, more subtle. That's pretty nice, 0.8. You can take it a little higher, a little lower. That'll work. It shouldn't matter now if we set this back to solid color. Or we changed a bitmap setting is all that we did. So it shouldn't affect anything. But that's where you find that bitmap setting. Alright, that would be my final running. We did change something in that I got rid of that shadow right there. There was something reflecting up above that I removed, so I'm glad I got rid of that. So that would make my basic render. Okay. This piece wasn't made for rendering. Obviously, I'd make the prongs smaller, what have you, so it would look nice. Still not in love with the ruby. I think it might help if I reactivated the Rhino environment. Yes, it did. Okay, much like I had done with the diamond, I have that Rhino environment in there. Now, I can't change the location or orientation of that environment. Okay, so because of that, I'm going to have to kick its influence down. I don't want this to be so visible and apparent. I wish there was a way at the environment level that I could play with that, but there isn't. In the environment level, they don't give you any mapping options. Okay, so it really doesn't help us. You know, I can. I've never played with the transparent color before on mapping for this. Let's take it up to 50% and see what happens. It made no real effect. If I made it a color, it might. But once again, it's minimal. What we want to do is soften the effect of that reflection of that environment. We'll drop it down to 30%. That's better. Okay. so it's not so powerful in its impact on the piece. Maybe even 20. Yeah, just something to give it a little more push. Okay, and I would call that a successful rendering. It's not professional level. It's not something that will compare to what Matrix puts out, for example. But for free, this renderer costs you nothing. Okay, it comes with Rhino. The ray tracer is a free download, so there's no output on your behalf. And with a little bit of work outside of Rhino in particular, you can get a very nice effect on doing this. Okay, so the way to get this out of Rhino. See this little white camera under the display? Okay, this captures viewport to file. If you click on this, and save it, it will take it outside of Rhino as a JPEG image. If we go into a photo editor of some sort, I'm going to use Painter because it is my favorite. Open that file. There it is. Okay. I can still work with this in this context as well. One of the things that I tend to notice a lot with these is they don't have enough contrast for me. By taking it a little darker and boosting up the contrast a little, I can create a pretty nice image, you know, crop it to proportions that are more appealing. And that's certainly good enough to go into a portfolio. Okay, so that's it, guys. Thanks for watching.